Something we hear a lot of is that news is delivered with a slant, that whether it be on TV or social media, opinions or misinformation is spread without the tools to figure out what is true and what is not. They need to be informed and not influenced. So we here at KSBY are partnering with the News Literacy Project to do just that, help make sure that we get the facts so that we can make our own decisions. So what does that mean? Well, here's a quick explanation.
There is so much coming at us every day. How do we know what is fact and what's fiction? This week, we are partnering with the News Literacy Project to answer that question. What to trust and what not to trust. This News Literacy Project will play out all week in schools across the country. Our journalists will work side by side with students here at home to create a news literate generation that can spot misinformation and prevent others from spreading it. They'll collaborate with kids on topics that are important to our community. You'll see special coverage, events, and conversations around information and cutting through all the noise to get to the truth. Knowing what is fact and what is fiction is essential to a healthy democracy. And this week, we'll shine a light on misinformation, how to avoid it, and make sure it doesn't get in the way of knowing the true story.
And over the past 2 months, we have been working with Morro Bay High School's journalism class on an in-depth reporting project. It's part of that new initiative by our parent company, Scripps, called National News Literacy Week. The students told us they wanted to report on an environmental issue, so together we looked into sea level rise and its impact on our coastal communities. KSBY anchor Christina Favuzzi shows us how local leaders are preparing for the worst-case scenario.
King tide waves crash onto Coleman Beach in Morro Bay, washing over the sand in a preview of what could be the new normal years from now.
King tides are the highest tides of the year, and they happen in winter. They show us what the normal tides of the future might look like.
Rachel Pass in the Morro Bay National Estuary Program want locals to better understand the potential, perhaps inevitable, impacts of rising tides.
Sea level rise is what happens when glaciers and polar ice caps melt and add new water to the ocean. And we'll see it here in Morro Bay and anywhere along any coast in the world.
The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration says the sea level has risen about 1/8 of an inch per year. That's 1.25 inches over the last decade.
Down by Morro Rock, you might not have a beach there one day.
It's a side effect of carbon emissions warming the atmosphere.
97% of scientists agree this is happening.
KSBY Chief Meteorologist Dave Hovde says the evidence of climate change is irrefutable, and even though sea level rise isn't greatly impacting our coastline yet,
The concern right now is that sea level rise, the rate that it's happening, is even exceeding predictions that we had, say, 5 years ago. So we need policy now.
Morro Bay Community Development Director Scott Graham watches the king tides with the future in mind.
It's a little disconcerting to think that that's what things could look like on a more regular basis.
In less than a century, scientists say the sea level could rise by nearly 10 feet in a worst-case scenario.
Sea level were to rise that much, we would have a difficult time dealing with it. Because you're talking about inundation of most of the neighborhoods in North Morro Bay on the west side of the highway. That's the Beachcomber track.
In that extreme case, Graham says the Embarcadero's infrastructure will need to be raised, along with the parking lot at Morro Rock, and they'll have to deal with erosion to beaches that border homes.
You know, if you have an oceanfront lot, there are some negatives to that in the long term.
With grant funding from the Coastal Commission, Morro Bay leaders have been analyzing sea level rise over the past 4 years, looking at the impacts in 10, 30, and 80 years. In the short term, we may see a foot of sea level rise eroding beaches by 2030. That goes up to 2 feet by 2050 and over 5 feet in 2100.
In the longer term, you know, the 2050 timeframe plus, you're looking at, okay, how fast is sea level rising in the areas adjacent to where our homes are in the beach tract?
Graham says climate adaptation is thread throughout the city's updated general plan, which council members are set to adopt this summer. That includes developing a sea level rise hazard management plan to examine the city's infrastructure and reevaluate it every 5 years. When the king tides return February 8th, experts say not to feel doomed, but look at how to reduce your carbon footprint.
There's reason for hope but we really have to start making the change.
We still have a chance to make a positive impact for our lifetimes and for our children and grandchildren.
Adapting to a warming planet and planning for what could become a very different Central Coast.
Morro Bay High School journalism students looked into the specific impacts of sea level rise where they live on their campus and what's being done to prepare. We talked with the students about what they learned from their reporting process.
I learned that my house is in a very affected area. It's likely that a lot of flooding is going to happen right at my house.
With sea level rise, it's something that I was definitely aware of before, but it wasn't something that I had looked into more specifically to see what it will actually look like.
The stories we tell today become history, and it's also keeping people knowledgeable about things happening in their community. And so I really like being a part of that and telling stories and allowing people to become more aware of the world around them.
To read the students' reports about sea level rise on the Central Coast, just look for this story at ksby.com.